All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
It's great
And,
to be here.
and for some of our listeners, you and I met kind of a funny way because we were working. GradCom was working for a project, and you were selected to be interviewed as part of that project. And I
Yes.
didn't even interview you; somebody on my team did, and they came back and they said, "You got to talk to this Jeff guy." He has the
Well,
most fascinating background. He has done so many interesting things. And so that's how you ended up on this podcast.
however it was, I'm just really grateful it happened. And yeah, I would do anything for NCMPR, the organization that we were working on a joint project on, and in which I'm a member of and a regional representative here in the Northwest. And then I found out what great things you all are doing at GradCom, and I'm like, okay, I really want to know more about these people.
Oh, good. Well, it's been a match made in heaven.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to start off by asking you to share your background with our listeners. Most of our listeners are communication professionals. So you've got just the most fascinating communications and marketing background. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. I'll try and be brief because I've had a long journey to my current path. And I just want to preface this by saying I was in some interviews for an outreach person this week at one of our campuses at our college. And there was someone who said at the end of their interview, like, I just wish I'd known, earlier in my life and earlier in my career that I would have ended up in higher ed and whatever this particular person's doing, because it's definitely a calling. And so I felt a strong sense of calling from the beginning, and I thought I've always been a storyteller. I'm just going to give you a really quick background. When I was like 11 years old, I was publishing some sort of print publication for my family and having the newsletter. And my parents were very tolerant of that, but I knew at that time that I wanted to do something with telling stories. And I ended up being at Eastern Washington University and kind of walked into journalism. And sports radio host Colin Cowherd was one of my students that I worked with me. And, they just had this great broadcast and journalism program. And I fell in love with sports writing because I was a sports fan. And so I took a whole career in journalism, where I then went to the technology side, like whenever we do new technology at the newspaper, because I ended up working at the local newspaper after a short stint, and in out of town. And then but I really just loved writing. So I always would like do editing, design, and writing. I always had writing at the same time. And so I just love getting people's stories. I'm the person who goes into the grocery store and comes out, with the clerk's story, and my wife rolls her eyes. And so then, journalism started evolving to digital platforms. And I really felt that digital marketing, because I was in the Portland market at the time, helping a newspaper launch its website, that digital marketing and social media marketing was really coming to the front. I'm living in Portland. There's events every night. Big speakers are coming in, influencers, and Intel's hosting this, and this group's hosting this. And so I just had this rich environment of people around me. We had one of the best bookstores in the nation there, Powell's Books. And so I'd go down and get a book, like What Does Technology Want, things like that. So it was just really like, okay, this is like bringing together all the things I like, the tech, the connections, and the storytelling. And, literally that's of course how a newspaper gets web views. So we just focused on storytelling, and I realized that a lot of my skills were transferable. And I think a lot of journalists are finding, and later in their midway through their career or some earlier, like, okay, you don't have to just work at a media outlet if you have journalism skills, because we're taught a lot of things. And I was fortunate enough to work on the web team at both my papers, more recently before I became a marketer. And then I got this job marketing gummy vitamins, because the US headquarters for the gummy vitamin company was in Vancouver, Washington. And then I went to PR firm and got to do some fun stuff. And agency work, as you know, can be really fun because you get to do a great variety of stuff and come up with a lot of strategy. But I started teaching on the side, teaching journalism. And I'm like, how does this higher ed and storytelling come together? Well, I came back to my alma mater, Eastern Washington University, about 7 years ago, and I worked in the communications department. I had the opportunity to just do a digital, electronic, website, started internal communications, also wrote for the publication, which is a great publication. And then I got an opportunity to go to Gonzaga after a couple of years, which is mostly known for its basketball, but we did 2 years of a web migration. And then while there, I got to work on video projects, photo projects, multimedia, storytelling, even helped them start their podcast network. And then I became an adjunct and teaching both undergrad and graduate students about content marketing and all that. And um, uh, then about a year ago, I ended up working not only, so I did, state university, private college, and then I ended up coming back, honestly, to my home and community colleges. As a first-gen student, I ended up with the community colleges of Spokane, and it's really just great to bring all the skills I have and put those in the community college space. So that's how I ended up here today talking to you. I wouldn't have been part of NCMPR if I wasn't at a community college. And, there's just, I work with a bunch of superstars and they're super nice people. And just on our campuses, like higher ed people, I think are so generously focused on the students. And they know they could be elsewhere and make more money. But I think we're all there for a reason. And so I've actually found this calling, and I'm able to use, everything I've learned over the last 25, 30 years in this venue now. And so that's how we got here today.
So, Jeff, I love the fact that you have taken like a reverse direction on your career. So, we work with a lot of community college marketing directors, and they have these like big dreams of going to a public university or private university and having endless resources and everything's figured out and the marketing plan's perfect, or going to work for an agency and getting to do things you've never done. But you've done it in the reverse order. You've done all these great, fascinating things, and now you're at a community college. What do you see are some of the differences between the different organizations and the type of marketing that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest difference, and if I look at kind of those distinguishing characteristics, because I can find commonality, but at an agency, on the one hand, I loved working with a variety of clients in every industry and having a lot of ideation. Of course, as you know, everything you do is billable. You're, always on the clock. You might have clients that disagree with your ideas, and that happens in our current jobs also. But um, then, something like the big university, one thing that's different about it is with those resources, with that visibility, especially in the case of a program that has a top 10 sports team in the nation every year. I think you're bringing in actually more applications, maybe 6 times more applications than you could ever accept. So there's a lot of people who'd love to get in there. So I think as a marketer, you're like, okay, we're kind of overshooting the mark here. We're not able to do anything with all the quote leads we're generating, which is what, agencies look at. And then I feel with the smaller regional universities and the community colleges where I'm at now, it's really more, I'm not going to say it's more mission focused, but it's a different mission. It's like, first of all, we could probably take all the people we get and maybe some more, maybe there's been enrollment challenges. So you're very aware of the business side of higher ed. But I think the places I've worked, they've said, don't let that drive what you do. If we do the right things, if we, are authentic and trying to serve our mission and serve our students, which is what every, I think, higher ed institution wants to do, even if we don't have the right resources, if we can show people a possibility that they didn't previously think of. And you think about the adult learner, that's the other thing, like the percentage of adult learners or transfer students versus the 4-year journey at any 4-year university is much different. And I just want to give a really good personal story just really quickly. There's actually a person in our town who I'm friends with now, and he is the perfect model of the difference between, say, a big private university and the colleges. And it's a person named Rick Clark in Spokane. He was on a micro Facebook show about starting a nonprofit, but he was literally a middle-aged person who was homeless. He was a father. He just felt like he was a failure. He lived in a part of town where no one he knew ever went to college. And he just said, I don't want my kids to grow up and feel sorry for me. So he walked into the community college and got, all these resources and slept in his van, studied by flashlight. And he didn't think he'd even be able to get his 2-year degree. Well, coincidentally to our story today, he ends up getting done. His son says, well, now that you're done, you should apply to Gonzaga. And he's like, yeah, that they're never going to take me. It's a big private institution, yada, yada, very elite. And he sent in his application, and it still I get chills when I think about this, but Gonzaga said they read every application and they said, Rick, we've been waiting for you and we have scholarships for you and come join us. And he's now a grad student there. So to me, that's the difference, but it's also, I think, the mission expressed in different ways and the different populations you're reaching. And of course, with Running Start and a lot of high school programs being possible, kids are having, I'm going to call them kids because usually they're under 18. The new generation has a lot of options, especially with the community college, sometimes with a public university, to do a Running Starter early entry program. And they may or may not know what they want to do, but I think that's really been, I think the affordability of community colleges is the other thing. Both, even the community colleges in my area are about half the cost of the smallest university in our region, and most of the region in the near town here are private universities, which cost substantially more and are more of a residential experience. Whereas a community college, you might be able to work, live at home, whatever, and be able to kind of pace your way through it. So for me as a marketer, it's different audiences and all that. And so I think the reverse experience worked because, instead of saying who are the fans of cupcake wine and what do they want on National Cupcake Day, and we had a great idea for that, it's now like, okay, we have this 1-year accelerated degree. How do we creatively market this and show people like you can get a 2-year degree in 1 year? So, as a marketer, those are things that you're always trying to solve a problem, but I guess I like the problems I'm trying to solve now. They really get me fired up. And I don't want to say there's anything negative to anywhere else I've been, but I think everything I've done has prepared me to be here.
Yeah. I just actually had a kind of an epiphany moment while you were talking. I've been seeing this trend of colleges community college combining their PR and marketing departments with their foundations and, calling it advancement. And it's a 4-year model. And I've been trying to think like, what's the advantage of that? And then when you were talking about how Gonzaga has so many applications, like they don't really even need to market, they're oversaturated. Well, no wonder there's an advancement model, because marketing then becomes the arm of raising funds for the scholarships to pay for the students. So anyway, I was just like, oh, maybe this is where the whole advancement model came from, is if you've got an overwhelming amount of applicants, why do you need to go out and market continually for more? Like, go raise
Right.
money, right?
Yeah, and what I really would say, especially as a Jesuit institution, Gonzaga was very intentional and said, well, we're not just going to become more elite. We want to be more diverse. We want to, make, like, we've been known as a liberal arts program, but we want to do STEM. We want to do research. And so really, yeah, giving the best facilities and experience to the students that come along. And then I think this happens in our case, it's a separate foundation. And then technically our PIO is the head of that, works for that foundation also, but the advancement part of the community college, and I don't know if it's everywhere this way, is more like, yeah, just carving out that half, regardless of who came through, we're only focusing on alums. And I think, to me, and I think the model we're working on in my current position is, there's some of our alums are our best stories that can also inspire, someone who's not in our college today. And I would say someone like Rick Clark is a good example of that. If he can do it, and he said that, like, I want people to come behind me, and if I could do it, anyone can. And teaching at a private university, there's also like a lot of behind the scenes stories, especially in a COVID/post-COVID era, where there's the same struggles for all students right now. And you can look on paper to be having it all together, but there's a lot of outside the classroom challenges for all students.
Now, I wanted to ask you specifically about one of your experiences where you were at, is it Gonzaga or Gonzaga?
Yeah, it's Gonzaga. That's fine. Don't worry.
Gonzaga. Because I'm not a basketball fan. I sit on a soccer field every weekend with my
We have a
boys.
pretty good soccer team too. Yeah.
But you capitalized on basketball, and I know you even had to do like some behind the scenes web work because of the amount of web traffic you got around the basketball team. And I think that is something that most community college marketers have never had to deal with. So I'd love to hear that story again, about Google and the website and how you dealt with all of that.
Yeah, so I came, as basically Gonzaga had never really updated their digital platforms to the standard of where the institution had risen kind of in a national view. And they're like, we need to do this. So they did this big web project. But the year before while we were doing the web project, the basketball team had become more popular, and as they were kind of a quote Cinderella team because they were upsetting higher ranked teams, then people started Googling, what is Gonzaga? Where is it? And so the first year they had that sensation, they literally crashed the servers for the website because they were used to just a regular lower academic volume of traffic. So then the first year I'm there, because I'm working on the web and I'm really more on the technical backside things, as well as doing some content creation, I find myself in this meeting with IT and us, and they're like, okay, so we're going to not let this happen again. And we're going to go ahead and have a backup website ready to go on Amazon Web Services. And just in case we hit this traffic thing, if we need to flip the switch, we will. The other thing we're going to do is, like, they had all these ways like caching and trying to, make sure the whole website wasn't updating all the time. And I'm glad to say that they didn't have that problem again. But what was really cool was the traffic kept rising, and it kind of built on itself. And I think any institution that's known for something, the best thing you can hope for is if it keeps going, you build the awareness of it. And like I said, it's free advertising. So then we got to this point where, after a few, it had been almost 15 years this was going on when I was at Gonzaga. And I said, okay, well, academics, we think we have great academics. How are we connecting it? There's literally a separate website for athletics. And I said, if you Google Gonzaga basketball, you won't find our website even. So when we built the new website, we put basketball on there as kind of an SEO draw. And then the thing I really loved doing was when I saw it every year, and it was even in Google's year-end video, like what people searched for in year whatever, it was like, where is Gonzaga was one of
Wait,
the
that
top.
was in Google's year-end video?
Yeah,
Where's
yeah.
Gonzaga?
And so I was able to send that to my boss in our department and go, okay, we're missing out. We
Yeah.
think the world knows about us, and so there's more room we can do. So I did the most, and I'm not going to say spammy, but the most SEO friendly article ever. And the URL was, "Hey Google, where is Gonzaga?" Because people were starting to ask their devices stuff, and I just tried things, and I tried to see what searches were specifically looking at, because you got all this data as a digital marketer behind the scenes, like you can see what people are searching for to get to your site. So I basically put this really dense 5-paragraph article on the website, and it has been the number 1 or 2 top article on the website since I wrote it, which was 5 years ago. So I think it just shows the power of what we do, and if we do it intentionally, and then it does call more attention. Like, yes, Gonzaga has great athletics, but we also have these great programs. And then when we're able to kind of revamp the homepage, once we get people to the homepage, it's almost all academics. And we try not to. I keep saying we, but when I was there, we tried not to focus on athletics because it was a really good university. It's a top 100 large university, just under the research institutions.
Well, I want to ask you more about content marketing and SEO, but first we're going to take a quick break. And we come back, I have another story that I'm going to draw out of you. So I hope that you're prepared.
Okay, sounds good.
How do higher education decision makers find the right solution when technology evolves at light speed? Well, we usually start with our network. EdTech Connect is the network that's democratizing the higher ed technology conversation. EdTech Connect is free, so anyone with a .edu email address can sign up and list the software and services they use in their role at their school. Once you're in, you can find out what solutions similar schools are doing all over the country. Whether you're looking to find the hot new AI tool, or maybe learn options you have to upgrade your campus search engine, or even get to your short list of marketing solution vendors, EdTech Connect is the place to go. So visit edtechconnect.com and set up your free profile to get a pulse for what's happening with higher ed technology today. Okay, welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about content marketing and SEO. And I know you teach content marketing. Yes. And we always hear content's king, content king. But how do you define what is content marketing, and how is it different than other things?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you said that phrase, because I was in the when I was in the journalism business, I actually had an editor as we were building this website that he wasn't too fond of. He liked the old school model. And he kept saying content's king, content's king. And I said, and as a digital change agent, I would say, okay, so what does that mean about not building a website or not putting money into a website? He's like, well, people want to pick up their paper in the morning. That was his definition of it. I think we are now learning, because all marketing is digital now. And I think that's something that's been a transition in the time I've been doing web to, because everything has some sort of translation, either from social to web, but so even within digital, there's cross-channel promotions. So I think the platforms have just changed a little bit, but content is the key of all of it. And I do have a story, but I want to say that because I know this, because not just I believe it, but web traffic, when I was in the newspaper business, is the currency they're looking for. And when we had a good story, especially a national story, where Peter, what's his name, from NBC News would be sitting in a courtroom in Vancouver, Washington, we had 4 million views when we normally had 1 million per month. So content does matter. And sometimes it's not the content we think is going to have results. Just a sec.
We're both taking a sip out of our GradCom mug.
Cheers.
And our virtual cheers. For those
Thank you.
listening to the podcast, we were trying to figure out before we started how we could do a virtual cheers. It's kind of sad. I don't think we're
Yeah.
very successful.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's a great mug. That's a free
Thank
commercial.
you.
Yeah. So I said, okay, well, what content do people want? So just really quickly, still in the journalism business, well, this old school person said a newspaper should have things like why your taxes are being raised. That's great. People want to know that, and they want to know what it is, but they don't want a full front page article that takes 20 minutes to read. They just want information quickly. So from journalism, we saw this adoption of kind of this digital publishing model. And so content strategy, I know it matters, because there's people like Christina Halverson and Ann Hanley, and these are people who are kind of, all the people that go to content marketing world. And I get to go as a +1. I'm not going to be at the conference, but my wife is going, and I'm going to get to see Ann again, I'm hoping, because I met her a couple of years ago. But these people have seen, they're the forerunners, and said content marketing is intentionally creating content where you know what the use of it is. And I think that's a big difference. A lot of times we would create content in the past and we wouldn't think about the use of it in advance, or maybe does one piece of content mean multiple things. So in the higher ed model, we have evolved it to podcasts like we're on here now. Maybe there's a short article about it, maybe there's a picture, maybe there's a social media post. A lot of the things I see you do and other people doing to promote your podcasts are a lot of what higher ed institutions should be, and not just looking at things as a one channel thing. What I have to tell my students all the time is, in a technical academic way, content strategy is different. Content marketing is the creating of content and using it, whereas strategy is kind of like figuring out that why and where it goes. And so in the class, I just want to give an example. We work with 3 nonprofits every year and say, okay, especially ones that need a lot of help because they're smaller and they can't do this. And it really helps the students to understand, that you're not just going to be working for DocuSign, which has a big presence in Seattle, for example. But there's a lot of ways that you can make content that's both compelling and does the job. So one example I share with them, going back to the basketball analogy, is that we had one year at Gonzaga where Jimmy Kimmel was really a big fan, and he wanted to talk about Gonzaga, and I don't believe it exists. And so we just would take the clips, we'd embed them, and I started this one web article. And instead of creating 17 web articles, a new one every day, I just created one and I kept adding to it, which was something I learned in journalism. And so that URL for that topic became gold to Google, because we had Jimmy Kimmel, does Gonzaga exist? Like, the university is printing up t-shirts. The athletics department showed up at Hollywood to be in Jimmy's audience and present the t-shirts. And then they played in the regional in LA. Like, it was just like this perfect marketing campaign. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And that article was ranking really high in Google. And then I was able to have links in there that linked to things like the article I mentioned before. And the other thing I didn't tell you was the first year that Gonzaga went to the Final Four, and I don't want to talk just about them, but when they won the semifinal game against South Carolina, I had real-time analytics open in Google, and I saw our website go from 1,000 users at one point to 10,000 within 60 seconds. And I got a video of that, and I was like, okay, this is the power of being in the right place at the right time. So whatever that is, Rick Clark became a national story both for Gonzaga and for us at the community colleges. And he is so humble and so loyal to where he started that that's the type of compelling story I'm looking at. It talks about our values and what we do as an institution, but it's really personal. It's about this person's journey. And if you watch anything about Rick Clark, you can't help but be moved, because he went back and helped other homeless people on the streets when he got himself up and going.
I think you bring up so many good points. But one of them that I saw just a couple weeks ago, another college did, was really capitalize on what's happening in pop culture. And I think that a lot of community colleges miss these opportunities, maybe because they're so busy with their jobs or they don't have that journalistic background.
Yeah.
We saw this, we're recording this podcast in August of 2023, and the Barbie movie has just hit $1 billion.
Yes.
And one of the colleges that we follow, that's not one of our clients, just one that we really like, their social, they took all these traditionally male dominated careers and they took pictures of female students and then they morphed them into Barbie. So it was like mechanic Barbie,
Yeah.
and then they had the salary range, like graduate with this salary, and then it was like
That's brilliant.
firefighter Barbie and police Barbie. And I'm like, this is brilliant because Barbie's trending, and now you're giving information that's relevant,
Yes.
and you're talking about women in careers that traditionally are male dominated. But they were like on it. I mean, they had their Barbie post up like the day after the Barbie movie came out.
And
So,
that's really being on it, and that is really smart. And I would love to learn more about that, because, for example, at our colleges, we have a lot of career and technical education, and we really like to empower those female students who are in there, and really just honestly, all the programs and all the participants, and say, hey, like, you can go to 2 years of running start and go out and make $70,000 a year as a welder or a CNC machine operator. But yeah, that is great,
yeah.
because you're right, we are too busy. I mean, I think everyone in marketing or everyone in higher ed, and sometimes everyone in every job, would say we're too busy. But I think that that's where you see that impact of less resources in a smaller organization, generally like a community college. That sometimes, I mean, you also now have 100 clients on campus, who maybe haven't updated their Facebook page in 10 years, and they want you to help them with it, because
Yeah.
enrollment, because some programs, they used to open the doors and they had, like you've probably seen, there were certain careers that were just automatically full programs. Now we have to fight for it a little bit more. And there's also small private colleges, like cosmetology schools, or business schools that are just in the local community, and they're saying, oh, well, you don't need to go to a community college because we can give you the same thing in 6 months for 10 times the cost.
Yeah, and people are liking that. We actually just talked to a college president last week, and he said, we're not losing students because of COVID anymore because they don't want to come to college. We're losing them because they're going to the for-profits down the street that offer our programs in half the time, and people are willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I honestly, this is just my personal opinion, but it really makes me sad to hear that, because I get people's stories all the time. And I remember talking to my grocery store clerk one day, and she's going to one of those schools here locally. And I'm not saying it's a bad school, but she's just barely making it in life, and she's paying, this higher cost to get it in a shorter amount of time. And I don't think, we have to help students understand that 2 years where you can still work while you're doing the degree versus a year, let's say, to earn the same certification, but you have to like drop everything, or pay all this, you're going to end up with a lot of debt that's normally associated with like a private university. And I think that loses the value of the community colleges. And I think that the other thing we've seen is, like, in our medical programs overall, there's such a shortage in a lot of medical fields that my doctor's office hasn't, the company that owns them, which is a Northwest regional chain, they are doing an in-house program where they'll teach you to be a medical assistant and then pay for any schooling you need. So yeah, I think because the capacity isn't always there, and it's hard to like adapt your whole academic offerings on the fly. And so I think a lot of community colleges, which reflects on our jobs, when they're trying to pivot on the fly to create academic programs, which is hard to do with faculty and all the steps you have to go through to update catalogs and do it right, then they come to us, and then we have to get them leads. And it's a competitive market in almost every field. But yeah, I think that when you mentioned COVID, I definitely we are glad in my current institutions that we're back to basically a baseline of pre-COVID. And a lot of people haven't gotten back there, and some people, and probably we don't know, like even if we've gotten back to pre-COVID levels, it's unclear whether there will ever be growth in the future, whether it's just kind of maintaining the status quo, and that's a win.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of colleges are battling with right now. Well, as we wind down our conversation, I don't want to point out that you're in the latter part of your career. That's
Oh
all I
yeah,
can
I
say, but
am.
I just did.
Right here.
You've had a fantastic, amazing career. You do some consulting, you do some teaching, you've just had such an interesting career. And there's a lot of job openings right now for community college marketing directors. I seen them pop up every single day. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to move into that job on how they can be successful?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say like the reverse career that I'm doing here is probably not the way people should go, because if they start earlier in higher ed, like I think if you have a passion for changing people's lives in that way. And I wish I'd known earlier that this was a good way to take my storytelling skills and help people like myself, who was first gen. So I would say, really, you have to first of all be passionate and enjoy what you're doing. And if you go out and say, I want to do this other job or this particular university, and maybe even be lower on the employment grid organizational level, you might not ever get to that marketing director level or communications or PIO director. Whereas I feel like the opportunity at the community colleges is, in my department, for example, I oversee social, web, writing, video, and photo. And by doing that, I would say anyone who's on my team could be the next person in my spot if I ever left or retired or whatever. I don't plan on doing that soon, but there's some people on my team that are very capable. And then that's just like basically one step away from being well, that would be a marketing director in a lot of organizations, or marketing and communications. And then you're one step away from being a PIO, which could be a 30-year career, and I think the other thing that people don't look at is just the benefits of publicly funded universities. When you look at healthcare and all the things, like, you don't think about those things when you're 22 years old, like, oh, I'm still on my parents' insurance until I'm 26. But if you have kids and copays and surgeries and dental bills, you can really, I think, look at the full benefit. But so I would say, if you come out with a journalism degree, if you come out with a marketing degree, there's even a student at Gonzaga recently who was working for the marketing team there, and they were more of a computer science person, but they knew how to like solve problems in marketing with their skills. And so, yeah, maybe even tech people. I think we're always going to need education, and people are always wanting to be bettering themselves. And even people in the latter stages of my life are in programs like Act Two, where they're doing, learning how to run their own nursery at age 65 and retire out in some community nearby. I think there's something for everyone. And it's also just a fascinating place to work. Like, we have poets, we have, there's a lot of EDI focus. And I think you can be in a place where that's not part of the fabric of the community, the greater community. But when you go on to a community college campus, it's just different. There's this connection and there's this community. And even if there's a lot of commuting students and students who aren't just hanging out on campus for 8 hours a day, there's just so many great places, student orgs, and affinity groups that people can get connected to. And so really just put yourself out there, spend some time, go to events at community colleges. And I can tell you, like, if you're working at a bank creating marketing content, that's great. But, there's also a lot of regulation with that. Maybe you want to be in a place where you can dress someone up in a Sasquatch, and have them do funny stuff like we do,
Or
or do
you can dress up as a Sasquatch, because
yeah,
I have one
no,
PIO client who also wears her school
really.
mascot. Yeah,
Oh
she's the
my
only
God.
one that will fit in it.
Yeah, we have that dilemma too. But yeah, so, or maybe you can then come up with this fun Barbie campaign. And I love it because you can make an impact and also just establish yourself as a leader in the marketing field. And, if you go to an MCMPR conference and you present, you might find yourself presenting at a national conference for a great idea you had. We won probably, I'm not bragging, but our organization won several national awards last year. That's really hard to do, to be part of a team, first of all, that does the work, then be nominated. But, I just think the entry to success at a higher level is more open at a community college level, but higher ed in general, I think just try different things, and maybe you like it at a bigger regional university, a state university, but just try it, because I think, to me, if you're a lifelong learner, if you want to learn more, if you want to learn more about anything, if you want to turn your talents and gifts over for other people, to me, it's a great way to express your mission in life.
Well, thank you for making it your mission because you've clearly made an impact in everywhere you've been.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your time on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate yours too, and just congrats on all the success you've had, and keep doing it, because a lot of us out there working in the field need the inspiration, and you share great ideas. Your company shares great ideas, so keep inspiring us in every way you do.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I hope to see you in person at NCPR.
There you go.